Hey, hey. Tobago updates. Na, 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 na. Good morning, Tobago. Na, 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 na. Wake up with Candace and Denicia. Let's go, go. It's a brand new morning. Rise up to a brand new dawning. As the passion start to rise, the energy fill the skies. I say thanks a favor to wake up and hail my neighbor. 60,000 people strong, and the vibes is never wrong.
Good morning, and welcome to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates, guys. Good morning again. And you know, whenever you see me here, it's because we're about to have those conversations that you want to have to get the morning started, and I'm going to ask those questions that you want asked. But before we kick off and get straight into this morning's discussions, guys, we're going to get into our news in 90 seconds. But first, I'm going to need my laptop to cooperate. All right. So we're going to start off with the minority leader, Kelvon Morris, who demanded the immediate resignation of Chief Secretary Farley Augustine and Education Secretary Zoisha Hackett. At a press conference yesterday, he said he had information that a citizen wrote to the Integrity Commission regarding the controversial audio tape. Morris also mentioned that the police were investigating it as well, adding silence was an admission of guilt, and Morris wants Augustine and Hackett to step down by midday yesterday. And staying with politics, the Innovative Democratic Alliance, IDA, described THA operations as rudderless, with the continued vacancy of the chief administrator. The IDA argued that it demonstrates the inequipness of the current administration, now engaging in a blame game with the central government regarding who's at fault. The party reiterated that while the political powers have locked horns on the issue, Tobagonians suffer. They request that the Prime Minister and Chief Secretary work together in the people's best interest to urgently solve the matter. Meanwhile, in another letter, Assemblyman Watson Duke alluded that the Chief Secretary sidestepping the urgency and seriousness of the matter. Duke took issue with the statement that the media does not set the Chief Secretary's agenda, only he does. The Assemblyman reminded the Chief Secretary that the media is duly bound to ensure accountability and responsibility from the administration and called for transparency on matters attracting public attention. And that was on News in 90 Seconds. Guys, this morning, as we saw in the headlines, we saw where Mr. Duke himself came out and is still calling for the Chief Secretary to give his comments, as well as the minority leader, Kelvon Morris, who called for the immediate resignation of the Chief Secretary and the Secretary for Education, which is Zoisha Hackett. And so what we are going to do this morning is have that conversation. And to have that conversation with me this morning, we have Mr. Leroy George, who is a member of the Tobago Civil Net, and he is also the corporate secretary at Tobago Civil Net. How are you doing this morning, Mr. George? I'm
doing fine. How are you?
I am okay. Nice to see you on set with us this morning. And so we're talking about the voice note gate and the request by the minority leader yesterday to vacate office for the Chief Secretary and the Secretary for Education. Before we get into the conversation, do you have any thoughts that you want to share on this?
Basically, a lot of thoughts. Nothing summarized that needs to be said right now. If you have a question, then I could
Okay, excellent. Well, as we get into the conversation, historically in Trinidad and Tobago, we have seen that in the past, the opposition, whether at the central government level or here on the island of Tobago, whenever there's an issue that arises, the first thing that happens is that they call for persons or representatives to demit office. How valid do you think that call is for persons to demit office, especially on the basis of this tape that has not yet been authenticated or commented on by the Chief Secretary for us to get a full picture of exactly what the situation is?
I think in understanding the authenticity of the call for him to demit office, one has to consider, why do people resign in the first place? Is it for the preservation of society, its structure? Is it for the preservation of the person's calling for the resignation, or is it for the person who is being called upon to resign? Why are you being called upon to resign? And in this case, I think it is in the best interest. Yes, it is in the best interest of Tobagonians, because we want to have that moral authority to say we have a chief secretary that is in good moral and legal standing. Yes, it is in the interest of a lot of the political opponents of the chief secretary, but more so than anything else, it is in the interest of the chief secretary and the Tobago House of Assembly Executive Council that he should demit office at this time, and I'm going to tell you why. Just yesterday, we saw in the Newsday, which is one of the more popular periodicals in the Trinidad and Tobago space, an article was published where we found out that Acting Commissioner of Police, or Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police rather, Mr. Simon, he would have confirmed that they are looking at that voice recording, and there is quite a big possibility that if that investigation has not already started, it's going to start very soon. And when you look at the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1987, right, that's almost 4 decades old with no amendments since then, you see that according to section 3, not subsection 3, but section 3 of that act, they list exactly how, and in section 4 also, but the two sections are almost identical. They list exactly how you could find yourself as being standing outside of the legal parameters of the Prevention of Corruption Act. And when you put that in conjunction, or you look at it in conjunction with the voice recording, which I don't think a lot of people in the Tobago space, or even in the Trinidad space, would even question whether or not that was authentic for a barrage of reasons. And when you listen to that voice recording, you see that definitely he would have committed an act that goes against, and I'm talking about the Chief Secretary and also the Secretary for Education, they would have committed an act that goes against the Prevention of Corruption Act at least. Right.
And as we get into
so
the conversation, I want you to make it clear. Are you representing the Tobago CivilNet in this conversation this morning? Because
when I was contacted yesterday to come on, we didn't have that discussion. If I was to decide what title, I have quite a few hats I would carry. I would probably go into one of the old hats as former research officer in the Office of the Minority Leader, or former elections officer in the Progressive Democratic Patriots. One of those two hats would be probably more appropriate for this conversation. Yes, I was a candidate for the IDA in the past THA election also.
Are you still a part of that organization?
I am still of the opinion that Dr. Denise Soyafat Angus is the best of the options that we have right now. Okay. Right now, we only have
So you're not representing IDA in this conversation?
In this conversation, I'm going to be representing myself as someone that has information. I'm former research officer in the Office of the Minority Leader and former elections officer in the Progressive Democratic Patriots.
All right, excellent. I just wanted to make that clear for the purpose of the Tobago CivilNet.
Very important.
So that it is ensured that the opinions that are shared here are not a reflection of the Tobago CivilNet. Yes. You can go ahead.
Right, and so when you look at section 6 of that act which you're talking about, you'll see that there are certain penalties there, and the penalties are pretty stiff. One of the penalties, when you are found in corruption or standing outside of the perimeters of that act, or having committed a crime according to that act, you would see that you could be charged with $500,000, you could be imprisoned for 10 years, and most applicable to this situation, you could also be made to demit your office or to resign forcibly. And also another thing to note in that act, we talked about section 3. If you look at section 4, they also talk about what happens to the other person, because section 3 speaks specifically to somebody holding public office, especially a government official, and it specifically made mention of the Tobago House of Assembly. Gaining any kind of favor using their position in a way that is corrupt, right?
Right.
And it
And
falls squarely onto what we heard in that
and I want to find out from you in
in
your
that
own
recording.
personal capacity, do you truly think that it is in the best interest at this point in time to have the chief secretary demit office? And what do you think would be the follow-up to that, him leaving office, and where would that leave this current administration, especially when you look at the overall developmental goals of the island at this time?
Well, considering the fact that the investigation already started or is about to start, there isn't probably a lot that could be done for the chief secretary. However, I was at the meeting that they had, the community meeting that they had, the Tobago House of Assembly Executive Council in Vacate, and I saw something that I found to be very interesting, and then the minority leader would have stated that what he saw is also the case whereby the chief secretary sought to make this issue an issue about not just himself and Mr. Isha Hackett, but also one including the entire THA Executive Council, when he said that by the time he speaks, the entire council will be exonerated. And up until he had said that, I don't think there was a serious conversation of the entire council being at risk of being found outside of the perimeters of the law according to the Prevention of Corruption Act and probably other acts also. And so, yes, he needs to step down, because when you look at Section 4 of that act, you would see that even the persons that would have been colluding with him in any way, shape, or form can also be found to be in breach of that act and could also find themselves being punished. So there needs to be a gap. He needs to create as much space as possible as a good teammate between himself and the THA Executive Council. They need to look for another chief secretary as soon as possible, and it's going to be the same Executive Council. It's just going to be a different chief secretary and a different education secretary.
Excellent. And the question is being asked, right? When you look at the grand scheme of development at this time, you have a lot of persons that have come out to ask for a response from the chief secretary. And in his response during that town hall meeting, he indicated that he is going to respond, however, within his own timing. However, the conversation still is on, because we saw that press conference happening yesterday by the minority leader, as well as the press conference that took place by Assemblyman Watson Duke. And many are asking the question, why isn't this same type of energy being put towards other developmental areas that would help to enhance the island, especially where the Tobago autonomy conversation is concerned? Persons like yourself and other persons who have come out to speak have not been very vocal on this matter when it is needed. So the question is asked, is there a political, most of the persons that have come out are politically associated. But on your behalf and on the behalf of the other person, are there political motives behind why the conversation is continuing to go on instead of waiting for the chief secretary to respond or waiting for the investigation to be completed?
I'm very sure that at least in the PNM camp, there's a lot of political motive taking place, and we could focus on that reality. And as you said, there's a lot of development taking place, and changing a chief secretary may mean a small step backward in terms of who is in charge, who's calling the shots, etc. However, when it comes to prioritizing, we have to understand the time-sensitive nature of this situation. The reality of the situation is, when you look at that act, that Prevention of Corruption Act, you could have a situation where the police is appearing at the homes of the members of the Executive Council, searching their documents and all of that stuff. And you could have a situation that is way more dire, way more sinister, way more destructive to the development of the people of Tobago and to the Tobago's infrastructure as a whole, and Tobago's structure as a society, if he does not demit office quickly. So it's no longer an issue of whether or not he should demit office, but how soon he should demit office, because you don't want a situation which part the police bringing in all the members of the Executive Council, because it kind of, to me, it seems as though he insinuated that that voice recording happened during a THA Executive Council meeting, and I myself suspected that to be the case, because in the voice recording, he would have said to Zia, when you come with your 7 persons, etc., that which who would obviously, if they didn't have a job, be rewarded with jobs, bring it here and we'll approve of it, etc. And the word here, I've been asking myself, what is here? And since he's talking about spending public funds, I know that the Tobago House of Assembly Executive Council is where decisions pertaining to spending public funds is concerned. And so again, I cannot overemphasize how important it is for him to protect his THA Executive Council. Don't try to bring them into the situation when they're already outside, and for him to resign office in order for him to separate himself from that, and also separate himself not only from the Executive Council, but also separate himself from the governance of Tobago, because this reflects very badly on Tobago. Channel 6 just last night asked if it looks like the Chief Secretary is making a fool of Tobagonians. 93% of them said yes, 7% of them said no. This is going to reflect very badly on Tobago, and there are going to be real side effects if he does not demit office immediately.
Excellent. And guys, we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be back right after this.
New dawn and as the passion start to rise. Yeah. Hey. Tobago updates. Na, 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 na.
Good morning and welcome back to GMT right here on Tobago Updates. And I'm having the conversation regarding the recording or the voice note gate. And I'm chatting with Mr. Leroy George, who is here in his personal capacity or as a former researcher for the Progressive Democratic Patriots.
Research officer in the office of the minority leader and former elections officer for the Progressive Democratic Patriots.
Okay, excellent. And so we were talking about the recording, and before you were talking about the importance of the Chief Secretary demitting office. And when let's get down to the actual investigative aspect of it, because as you said before, the matter has been submitted to the police for investigation and to the Integrity Commission as well, as was stated yesterday by the minority leader. When we talk about the investigative aspect of it and we get down into some of the details, one of the questions that arise, number one, is the authenticity. You know, that continues to come up. Not even if the conversation was had by the persons that we heard, but if the conversation was had in the order in which we heard it, because we are understanding of the nature of technology. Is that so? If it is so, and that was the nature of the conversation that was had, then the question arises, when the Integrity Commission looks at this, what laws have been breached in regards to corruption? Is it really misbehavior in public office, or is it misuse of public funds? And then when we look at it at a deeper level, based on the conversation that we heard the conversation talk about hiring individuals that would also do work that is specific to the party. To the party or the political aspect of things. I want you to look at it from the side of how many staff members do elected officials actually get to employ, and the criteria within which those employees are employed. And when you look at it from that perspective, is it really against the law?
That's an excellent question, by the way, right? As a former employee in the office of the minority leader, I've seen brought into the public space the fact that you have a minority leader's office and you would have persons in there like Marilyn David, even Rhonda, etc., that would be putting information out there, right? And a lot of persons are saying, what is the difference between that and what the Chief Secretary is talking about? And there is a very big difference. The first difference is, when the Chief Secretary spoke, he spoke of, inclusive of other forms of or agents of propaganda, he spoke of fake profiles. And when you think about fake profiles, well, you don't even have to think about it. You just have to go on your Facebook and you look at these fake profiles, you look at the information they're putting out there, and you could see that because their face isn't attached to these profiles, because there isn't any accountability, their name isn't attached to the profile, there isn't any transparency, the information that is put out there by these fake profiles are erroneous to begin with, right? That's the first problem right there. Whilst in the case of, let's say, the members of the minority leader's office, whatever they say is going to reflect on the minority leader. So there is some accountability not only to themselves, but also to their employer also. And so that is why when you look at the information put out there by persons like Ms. Robley, by persons like Mr. Marilyn David, etc., we cannot honestly say that we're seeing the kind of ridiculousness, for want of a better wording.
You mean the
that we
propaganda? The propaganda.
Yes, propaganda.
So
even
you are
propaganda,
saying that members of the minority council who work within the minority councilor's office are not putting political propaganda out there on social media?
No, it's political propaganda. I remember you had a conversation with Marilyn David about the definition of propaganda, and you both were correct. When you look at the definition according to Oxford and different dictionaries, etc., it speaks specifically to political influence in the way that you put out information. So you have good propaganda, you have bad propaganda, you have propaganda that could be said to be coming from a reliable source, that could be said to be coming from an unreliable source.
Or it could also be just putting particular facts out there to create a particular narrative. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is a lie that is going on.
When we start having that discussion, we start talking about opinions. I feel like what you said was really, really bad, and I feel like what I said is really, really good. However, we have to understand, and that's why I keep referring to, and I'm going to refer to it again, the Prevention of Corruption Act, right? And it's not the only act that they're going to be looking at, but that is the one that I looked at and could see very clearly that the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Education, they are outside of the parameters set there. Right.
But let's look at it from this perspective, because, you know, we hear on social media where everybody has their ability to give their opinions. And one of the opinions that continue to pop up, I would say, in support of this administration is that people are claiming, although they have no evidence, that they know of a number of persons who, during the previous administration reign, who would have worked within the offices of certain assemblymen, who their sole purpose was to sit on Facebook and comment or make mischief or run fake profiles as well. And although that may not have been out there in the public space, it comes across a bit hypocritical on the part of the minority leader and this current administration to come out in the public and ask the Chief Secretary to demit office for things that they themselves would have engaged in, but probably not recorded, saying that they are doing that. So what is your perspective on balance in regards to this whole integrity question when the Chief Secretary is being called to demit office?
Shenell, notwithstanding the fact that that conversation about this topic from a moral perspective, in my opinion, came to an end yesterday once you saw that article in the news there and it becomes a police investigation. Notwithstanding that fact, I am very certain the PNM has done much worse. There is no question about it. I'm very certain the NAR did much worse when they were in government. I'm very certain the UNC did much worse. But it is important to understand from a legal perspective that no one has ever gone to prison, no one has ever been charged, no one has ever been convicted at least for committing a crime.
Like of that nature?
No, for ever committing a crime. You don't go to jail, you don't get punished for committing a crime. You know what you get punished for? Getting caught committing a crime.
Excellent.
So you cannot use it as an excuse that we think or we even know, but we didn't catch a whole heap of other people doing illegal things. The reality of the situation is we caught these two public officers doing illegal things,
the
and as a result, we have some social responsibility, and that social responsibility is presently being executed by the TTPS and other persons.
I want to ask you a question, though. In regards, can a person be indicted for having a conversation, or do they have? Does it have to be proven that indeed what happened in that conversation was actually executed? And how does the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service investigate and incriminate the individuals that were speaking in this video? How do they pin them to actually doing what was said? That is my question. That's what I would like to.
That is the beauty of that Prevention of Corruption Act. Again, as I would have mentioned, it's been in place since 1987, almost 4 decades years old. It has not been 4 decades old, rather. It has not been amended, and it's because the wording is so perfect that there is no need for change. In section 2, they give you definition of different words and terminologies, and so you would see words and terminologies that very almost customized fit the description of the Chief Secretary and the description of the Secretary of Education. For example, they mentioned the Tobago House of Assembly. Officials from the Tobago House of Assembly, in particular, they would have made mention of them in Section 2 of that Act. And they also speak about not only if you commit the crime, but also if you collude to commit the crime or if you conspire to commit the crime. So they make there is no distinction in the Act between persons who actually commit the crime and persons who conspire to commit the crime.
Excellent.
So really and truly, it's just a matter of, as you keep bringing up the authenticity of the situation, it could be done the easy way, it could be done the hard way. I make videos for a living through Green Tobago Tours, so I deal with sound, etc., manipulation of sound, etc. I could tell you, from where I stand, even though I'm not an expert, I am a practitioner of dealing with that type of situation. I'm 102,000,000% certain that we're hearing the voice of the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Education. And I would probably suggest that he just acknowledge that it's him, so long as it really is him, unless technology has gotten to Star Trek levels, right? Because that is what it would take to create that particular conversation involving not only our dialect, but that many people speaking. You could hear there's a point where not the Secretary for Education says something and somebody bangs on the table, right? And you could tell the sound waves is coming closer from the voice that we assume to be the Secretary of Education to the person recording than, say, the Chief Secretary, because you could tell the difference when your ears is trained for it. So they could do it the easy way.
So you are trained in forensic technology investigations?
No. My understanding of sound manipulation is limited to the videos that I make for promotion through Green Tobago Tours. Again, I'm not an expert in the matter, but even with the little knowledge I have on the matter, I would be very, very surprised to hear otherwise. And also the silence. I would agree with everybody that the fact that it's been 23 days now and they haven't said anything, that also, it just puts a stamp on what... It's not a question mark in my case. It's a certification in my case that we are looking at an authentic voice recording situation. And just one more thing I want to say, that generally speaking in investigations, not just the police, but the judicial system also, they don't like when you waste their time. So don't waste their time and have them bring in specialists and all of that. Although I'm very certain that specialists have already been brought in and the police have a very good idea as to what is going on. But don't waste their time when you could just come out and say, listen, we all know it is me, this is the case, etc. And throw yourself at the mercy of the public. There is still the option and the possibility that those two individuals and whoever else may be possibly indicted, those individuals could walk away with the respect of the people of Tobago, if nothing else.
Okay, and excellent. Thank you very much. Again, Mr. George, we want to thank you for giving us your time this morning. However, we are out of time, so we have to wrap up this interview. Again, thank you for sharing your opinions. Guys, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with much more conversation. See you soon.